Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing well. It's Brother Akers again. I'm going to read a story for you today. Last week I read a story from Robert McCloskey called Make Way for Ducklings. This week I'm going to read another story by the same author, Robert McCloskey. And this is one of my favorite stories from growing up. I used to love this particular story. I found it in a book in the Phoenix Library when I was growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, and I checked it out multiple times because it always made me laugh. So I hope you enjoy it. The name of the story is Lentil by Robert McCloskey. The picture just right. In the town of Alto, Ohio, there lived a boy named Lentil. Lentil had a happy life except for one thing. He wanted to sing, but he couldn't. It was most embarrassing because when he opened his mouth to try, only strange sounds came out. And he couldn't even whistle because he couldn't pucker his lips. But he did want to make music, so he saved up enough pennies to buy a harmonica. Lentil was proud of his new harmonica, and he decided to become an expert. So he played a lot, whenever and wherever he could. His favorite place to practice was in the bathtub, because there the tone was improved 100%. He used to play almost all the way to school, down Vine Street to the corner of Main, past the finest house in Alto, which belonged to the great Colonel Carter. Then past the drugstore, the barber shop, and the Alto Library, which was a gift from the great Colonel Carter. By the Methodist Church, through the Carter Memorial Park, and around the Soldiers and Sailors Monument that the Colonel had built there. Then Lentil would stuff his harmonica into his pocket and take a shortcut up the alley behind the hardware store so he would not be late for school. It's very important to not be late for school. People would smile and wave to Lentil as he walked down the street, because everyone in Alto liked Lentil's music. That is, everyone but old Sneap. Old Sneap didn't like much of anything or anybody. He just sat on a park bench and whittled and grumbled. One day, news got around that the great Colonel Carter, who had been away for 2 years, was coming home. People began to plan for a grand welcome, but when old Sneap heard the news, he said, "Huh, we was boys together. He ain't a mite better than you or me, and he needs taking down a peg or two." Sneap just kept right on whittling, but everybody else kept on planning. Colonel Carter was the town's most important citizen, so the people hung out flags and decorated the streets. The mayor prepared a speech. The Alto Brass Band put on their new uniforms, and the printer, the grocer, the plumber, the minister, the barber, the druggist, the iceman, the school teachers, the housewives and their husbands and their children. Yes, The whole town went to the station to welcome Colonel Carter. The train pulled in. The musicians in the band were waiting for the leader to signal them to play. The leader was waiting for the mayor to nod to him to start the band, and the mayor was waiting for Colonel Carter to step from his private car. All the people held their breath and waited. Then there was a wet sound from above. There sat old Sneap sucking on a lemon. Old Sneap knew that when the musicians looked at him, their mouths would pucker up so they could not play their horns. The whole band looked up at old Sneap. The mayor gave the signal to play, but the cornetist couldn't play his cornet. The piccolo player couldn't play his piccolo, the trombone player couldn't play his trombone, and the tuba player couldn't play his tuba because their lips were all puckered up. They couldn't play a single note. The musicians just stood there holding their instruments and looking up at Sneap sucking on the lemon. The leader looked helpless. The people were too surprised to move or say a thing. And the mayor wrung his hands and wore a look that said, "Can't somebody do something, please?" As old Colonel Carter stepped out of the train, the only sound was the noise of Sneap's lemon. Clouds began to gather on the colonel's brow, and he said, "Huh," in an indignant sort of way. Of course, Linton's lips were not puckered, and he knew that something had to be done. So he took his harmonica and started to play "Comin' Round the Mountain When She Comes." When Lentil began the second chorus, Colonel Carter smiled. He let out a loud chuckle and began to sing, "Driving 6 white horses when she comes." Then everybody sang, and they all marched down Main Street behind the colonel's car. Can you see Lentil sitting on the back of the colonel's car playing his harmonica? Lentil rode with the colonel, who took a turn on the harmonica when Lentil's wind began to give out. He said he hadn't played one since he was a boy, but he did very well considering. They marched to the colonel's house and paraded through the gate and onto the front lawn. The mayor's committee served ice cream cones to all the citizens, and Colonel Carter made a speech saying how happy he was about such a fine welcome and how happy he was to be home again. When he said that he was going to build a new hospital for the town of Alto, everybody was happy, even old Sneap. You never can tell what might happen when you learn to play the harmonica. Isn't that a fun story? What about you? Do you play music? Do you have an instrument that you'd like to learn how to play? I remember when I was in the 3rd grade, I heard a fellow play the trumpet in a church service at a camp meeting. And he was a little older than me. He was probably middle school, maybe even high school. But he played that trumpet, and he played it just as loud as he could. And something about that trumpet music got me so fired up. That night, I couldn't sleep a lick for wanting to play the trumpet. I wanted to play the trumpet so bad I couldn't hardly stand it. It was all I could think of. And my parents went out and got me a trumpet, and in fourth grade, I started to play. And boy, what a lot of enjoyment I had from that, learning to play an instrument, and still enjoy playing music today. Well, God bless you, and I hope to have another story for you next week.